So Melissa, would you like to go first to give us a little introduction and maybe just a quick kind of overview of how you ended up in UX?
Totally, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Strader. I'm a UX lead in Google. Specifically, I work in the area of Google Health. I ended up in UX by a non-traditional path. So I could not decide between computer science and psychology because I love them both. And in the meantime, I also found out that I really loved making websites. And so I kept web design and web development as a side gig throughout my education. And then while I was studying human factors in grad school, I had a very perceptive advisor who encouraged me to apply for an internship at this company called Google. They were hiring for something called a usability analyst, and that was around 2006. I went out there for what I thought was going to be a short internship, and I completely fell in love. That was the beginning of my user experience career, and I ended up working at Google as both a researcher and designer. I ended up leaving to explore the startup world in the San Francisco Bay Area and found my way back to Google again. So that's the basics. Nice to meet you all.
That's a nice roundabout way to do it. Perfect. Okay, Nida.
Hey, everybody. My name is Zada. Like Melissa, I'm a UX lead at Google, and I am in the research org within Google. I came to UX because I wanted to be a comic book artist pre-college, and because my parents convinced me that that wouldn't be a good way to make money, I went to go into college for illustration. And then I got there, and they're like, "You're okay, but you're a much better designer." And I was like, "What's this design thing you're talking about?" So the last half of my college experience was very much into design, and I realized I really had a calling for it, and I loved it. My first job was basically at Amazon back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it was really nice to have a design position in which it was required that I think rather than just do. And that was like the first realization that I needed that. This is actually very much a topic, and this is what I needed in a role that I was in. And from there, I've got a lot of the trading cards, the technology trading cards, of course, Google, Amazon. I've been at Yahoo, even Comcast, doing some both product and design work, and also did some work in startups, which has been, that variety of experience in my career has been very interesting. And I've been at Google for about 6 years. Half of it in search, doing some innovation work in there to kind of make search more interesting and dynamic. And now in research, a variety of topics. My team does thematic work every year, both including AI and creativity, for example, or education and underserved. We do a lot of interesting kind of work. That's me.
Perfect. That's so interesting. The whole comic thing's so cool.
Yeah, it still kind of calls me like, "Are you sure?"
Well, one day, or side projects if you can squeeze anything else in. Perfect. Thank you so much. It's great to have you both to talk to us. Thank you so much. So we have a few topics that we'd like to discuss on this general theme. So shall we start with the first thing around how you basically take the right time to reflect on yourself and understand what it is that you need. I'll let you two sort of guide the discussion on this point.
Do you want to kick this one off, Nida? Me? Okay.
I can do it if you'd like. I'm happy to.
That's okay. I think we have different approaches, so it'll be interesting. So in terms of checking in with myself, I find that I'm not very good at doing this organically. So I've made mistakes earlier in my career and have chosen to move on, looking back maybe when it was a bit too late. And so now what I find works best for me is I have a little bit of a routine, and I force myself every 6 months to do a really, really big zoomed out look at what has been giving me energy, what's making me feel excited, what's taking away from my energy, And what's really making me feel excited to get out of bed in the morning. And I have these documents that I will write. It's like a running document that I do every 6 months for myself, where I look at what I'd like to accomplish in the next 6 months, and I reflect on what I had written for myself in the past 6 months, and I will completely forget over the course of 6 months. So I'll try to check in every month or so and see, am I making progress on this? If not, why? Did I choose to abandon it for a reason that was out of my control? Am I okay with letting it go? There's no such thing as a perfect job. And so at the end of the day, for me, what's important is making sure that I feel like I'm on board with the mission of whatever I'm designing for, whatever I'm leading, and that it's personally fulfilling to me in some way. And so for me, personal fulfillment involves making sure that the work that I'm doing is helping other people and that I can see that it's helping other people. So if I'm hitting a rough spot, I'll check in with myself more frequently to make sure, is this a temporary thing, or is this becoming a pattern that I need to pay closer attention to and decide, do I need to shift how I'm thinking about my role? Do I need to shift my actual role? Do I need to shift my perspective? Sometimes it's a little bit of all three.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point to kind of highlight how we approach these things differently. For example, I would love to see that doc if you want to share. I am much more organic with things, which has been both good and very difficult for me to kind of deal with. I have, in like the winter and the January space, I came out of a medical leave because I was under so much stress. And that stress and that coming out of that really was a good point to be like, okay, no, you really seriously need to pay attention to this. And some of the things that kind of came out for me is really understanding what nourishes me in my creative role. I have a job, but really it's about being an efficient and joyful creative is kind of like where I want to be. And there's a few things that I had to kind of outline and understand what do I require to feel that way, that kind of joy and flow in my work. Because Melissa's right, no job is perfect. So you have to kind of remember, like, what are those things that float to the top that you have to kind of keep in mind? So for me, it's like, is my team supportive? Like, is the team I'm in the kind of team that's like, you know, hey, I'm willing to kind of jump in and help you out, or here's another great idea, or like highlights other people's accomplishments so that you feel you're part about a group making success together. I'm the kind of person who thrives on that. I love it. And when I don't have it, I've noticed that even if the topic is super interesting, I just slowly just erode, you know, until I'm just like this stressed out, you know, person, because I need to have that kind of teamwork. My values have to definitely be part of that. I have to work on something that I think is important. It could be small important or big important, or it could be something small that makes someone else do something important. Those are all good things, but I have to feel like I'm going in a direction that will improve things for other people. It's very much why I love being in UX, is to transform what I'm seeing in research, for example, these like cutting edge technologies, into something that actually feels like it would fit into people's lives. And so that means that because I've just come out of a pretty stressful kind of situation, as I check in weekly, if I start to feel like even the least bit of anxiety, I'm like, I just do a quick check-in. Are you anxious because can't get something done? Are you anxious because this is trending in the wrong direction? And, you know, I've made a few adjustments, even to the people who report to me, to make it feel more like a community, to make it feel like I'm supported, that they're supported, and together we can kind of make this happen. So I think kind of the things that I kind of took out of this experience is that it's true to kind of look at the role, whether it's giving you what you want, is it in the space that you want to be in, is it giving you the compensation that you want? But in the end, you have a reason that you're doing this work, and you have the things that nourish your ability to do that work, and paying attention to that and knowing what those things are for you will help you kind of like make decisions as you kind of go week to week, or 6 months to 6 months, or year to year, or you make those decisions.
Perfect. That's super interesting that you both have a way of actually checking in and doing that. And you both mentioned like you know, taking concerns like health things that are maybe external to what people might naturally think of as your career and the things that you want in that. How do you manage that, especially, you know, the current 2020 state of life where maybe moving on or like finding those new opportunities may be a little bit difficult? How do you weigh those against the other considerations that you're making?
Oh, wow. Like, how do you weigh 2020 against anything right now? It's just like enormous, right? I think there's probably a lot in that question. So I'm just going to kind of answer the thing that's top of mind. Let me, Courtney, if I'm like going off the rails a little bit, like course correct me back in. I think that the thing that has been important for 2020 is kindness. And, you know, a lot of that has meant like people that we work with, you know, partner teams, acknowledging that it might take them longer to do something, acknowledging that for myself, it's not going to be feeling 100% this year, really, you know. That being said, one of the discussions that I've had with many people is that I'm fully enjoying working from home. And that space that allows me to monitor my health, when do I exercise? When do I stop and eat? I wear these glasses because I get migraines from monitors, which I lovingly discovered at the beginning of the pandemic. So when do I take time away to kind of like make sure that I don't, you know, trigger a migraine? Like all these things are like, you know, really, you know, very important. And then when you start thinking about if you want to move on, like what that next role might be, it becomes even more stressful because it doesn't feel completely stable out there in the world. Like, you know, how you're going to look for what you're looking for. And I'll let Melissa speak to this because I'm sure she has some great ideas, but I will just offer this, that I think that, that, you know, it's almost like a spoiler to say like the crux of all this is understanding what you need in yourself. And, you know, part of that is understanding like what you need in a period of time. So it could be that in 2020, you need something different than you needed in 2019. So maybe that 2020 is just about financial security, but making sure that, you know, if you're in the States, making sure that you have benefits, you know, because of the company that you're working for. Yeah, Kara, absolutely. Blue light glasses are amazing. Just for anybody who gets migraines, these are FL41s. So the, you know, I think kind of like it's okay to not have everything that nourishes you happen all at once. And it's okay to take positions that are good for you for like the short term and move you towards what your like longer term goal is. And I think 2020 actually provides a lot of opportunities for that, especially if you're interested in super thoughtful work. We're dealing with both climate change and a pandemic and racial inequality, among many other things. And, you know, that's where UXers step up. So I think there's a lot of interesting spaces for that.
I'm not even sure what I have to add to that, Nida. But I do think all of the elements that you've mentioned, for me, really resonate, especially just recognizing how important it is to have flexibility. And personally, for me, I'm working part-time right now, and that was a difficult boundary for me to set initially with my team. It was difficult to ask for. And I'm so glad that I did, because I was afraid that by cutting my hours, I might be missing out on project work, or I might be cut out of certain decisions, or I might lose some of the community that I have. I might lose some of my time, but none of those have actually been true. And what I found is that by speaking up and setting that boundary about what I needed, it created space for the people around me to acknowledge that and to help me figure out how to manage things. So I've really appreciated that. And my hope is that what we see in working models as a result of what's happening right now is that we will be open to more flexibility. I've seen some folks on my team personally who have really challenging personal situations. And as a result of trying to navigate around that, we found creative ways for them to, you know, a new lens to look at a project, or we've realized, actually, we don't need to spend that much time on this thing. It's not that important anymore. So by starting to think about what you need and drawing those boundaries, I mean, that's at the heart of design. When you have more constraints come into the picture, sometimes that's actually a way to find out where you can be creative and what your priorities really are.
That's super interesting. It's very like cathartic to talk about this kind of thing in this way. That kind of what you were talking about there, Melissa, kind of brings us on to the next general topic around like how do you go about building that community around you so that you can, you know, check in with them and check in with yourself and understand even from them, like, right, like what opportunities you can move on to. Like, how do you go about building that?
My community has been, I feel like some of it has been good fortune, serendipity. It's hard to know. So I'm part of a number of different communities, and sometimes it's that chance interaction and following up on that and really putting yourself out there to try to build or strengthen a relationship that for me seems to be working for building a community. I feel like Nida has done a much more intentional job of this. For me, it feels somewhat haphazard. I appreciate the relationships that I have very much, but I feel like a lot of it has been showing up in forums and then seeing somebody who has this, who makes this comment or has this seed of wisdom that inspires me, and reaching out to them directly and saying, hey, I was inspired by that, or I see myself in that comment that you made. Can we chat more about it? And I set aside time on a regular basis just to connect with people for virtual coffee, because that's what we're all doing now. And I found it to be, it's really valuable, and it takes work to put that together and maintain it, but it's also indescribable in terms of not having to feel alone for whatever it is that you're going through, especially when you're thinking about making transitions, since that's our topic today. I have a couple of people who I trust inherently when I'm thinking about something. I'm like, I need a gut check. Am I thinking about this the right way? And I have a couple of people who will say, Melissa, you are being irrational about this. You need to sleep on it and come back to it tomorrow, or you're completely missing the point of whatever it is that's bothering you. So some of it is about finding people who are willing to give you that dissenting voice too, and really challenge you to be your best self. So, yeah.
I think that both Melissa and I work in very promising, inspiring spaces within Google that are also very challenging. And to Melissa's point about feeling alone, it's amazing how you can feel alone in an org of thousands of people, and realize that because of that, all the things that you have to navigate in a complex role, like if you're looking at research, for example, you're like, do I want this research to be out in the world? Is it safe? How can I make it so that it actually works well? It doesn't install biases into the models, for example. How can I navigate the good and, you know, whatever politics of my org to make these things happen? All those things are not things that they tell you in, like, you know, any kind of schooling or experience you had to get into UX to say, like, oh, by the way, you should learn how to influence well. You should understand, like, politics. You should understand the fact that you can work with a lot of people who don't necessarily think like you. And that means that when you don't have a community around you, so I'm just going to do a pre and post medical leave, let's say pre-medical leave, you know, I had, like, Melissa and I were having conversations, for example, and like the first time that I had a chat with Melissa, I was like, this is someone I can trust, you know, and it felt like, it immediately felt right. Like, okay, this is someone who I feel I can trust. And I've been starting to collect people, you know, as I meet them, like, okay, you belong on the team. You may not know you're on a team, but you belong on the team. You know, you're the team, or you're the, like, and I'm just starting to, like, slowly build this, like, group of people together. And it's so true, because, you know, otherwise, like, you know, things happen and you just want to, like, share. And if you don't have that trusted community around you, it can be very difficult. You may have coworkers you love to work with, but it's different than like this kind of level of trust and understanding that you can have with other people. So I think that like when I say things like community and things like that's kind of what I'm talking about. It's like Melissa said, when you go to like a conference or you go to a speaker series or you work with someone who you have a connection with, you should try to establish that connection and keep it healthy. And that has been kind of the work for most of this year for me, and has been really amazing in helping me kind of like, stay focused and be able to kind of like do the kind of work we do, which is, again, very difficult to do. It's a complex job. Yeah, so I 100% on that. Community is so important.
That's great. Thank you both so much. So the next thing we wanted to just touch upon is this idea of, how to know when it's time to move on. And the reasons why you might move on, and the fact that, they're not always necessarily a negative thing. It doesn't have to be framed in that way. A lot of the things are to improve the role that you're in, or to like just try something different. So how do you kind of approach that, and how do you decide when it's a good reason to move on?
Oh, there's so much in here. So I'll just start. Maybe Melissa, you can kind of jump in when it feels like a good point. So yeah, agreed. It's not always a negative. There's a term that we use in our group called graduation, which is that you work on something and then it graduates to a product area outside of research, right? And I've always appreciated that concept of graduation because it's a celebration. Like, it's okay. Someone might leave the team because they're going to help take this project, into the product areas, or they might stay and help that kind of thing happen. And that graduation, that kind of loss of something that was joyful to do, but also watching it grow up and, walk away, is something that I've kind of thought about in terms of like, my career path as well. If you think about it from the point of view of like, you've done the good work, you've leaned towards something you're interested in, you've like, for me, the shiny object is there that you want to engage in. And then you kind of feel like maybe it's a good time to graduate to the next thing. That's the thing of where like, it's good. There's a bittersweet quality to it, but it's good. And it feels like a good place to be. And preparing for that is similar to creating your community, but now your community is more about the subject area that you're interested in, for example, or the area that you want to work. If you're interested in, let's say, like, machine learning, for example, finding the right people who know that area, understanding the space, creating your network around it is a really interesting way of like understanding what it might be like for you, and also where you might have opportunity to do that. And, maybe I should pause there, Melissa, if you have any thoughts on the not only negative side of it, and then we can move on to some of the other stuff.
Sure. Yeah, I love the idea, the concept of graduation, because I think for me, in all of the roles where I've moved on, almost all of them, it's felt like this transition where you're grieving the loss, the things that you're going to leave behind. But at the same time, there's this feeling of celebration. There's an anticipation of what's next and what you're excited to do. And I think for me, in addition to thinking about the domain area, sometimes the excitement is around working with a person I've wanted to work with for a really long time. Having a good manager is so important. I have taken roles just to work for a specific manager because I know that things are going to be great with them. They're going to inspire me to do my best work, and I'm going to learn a ton. So, and then there's also the idea of building. I know early on in my career, I thought about it as building my toolkit. There were skill sets that I was excited to develop. And no single project will give you a taste of every skill set in design or research that you want to have. So some of it is also excitement around a new opportunity to try a new method, or to go very deep in a certain part of my craft that I might not have gotten to experience yet. Or maybe experience a new aspect of leadership, or a new way to influence a product that wasn't possible on a new project. So there are a lot of really, really positive reasons for moving on.
Yeah, I think along those lines, for example, I'm becoming very interested in writing and sharing what I've learned and doing this kind of work. And that's not typically part of UX. It is actually very typical in research, was something that I've had to kind of learn, since research tends to be a very academic space. But how do we share what we know so others can kind of leapfrog ahead of us? I think is something very interesting to me. And so that means that if I were to take another role, I would want writing to be an important part of it, so that I learn to do that craft better and better. And also don't feel like I'm having a heart attack every time I try to post something because of the nervousness. But it's very much about learning those new crafts and getting excited about it, as well as new subject areas. But there's the other side of that, which is that things aren't working out, and it is time to move on. And that one is very much where I really feel that need to understand what works for me and what doesn't work for me, so that I can understand my anxiety through the lens of is it anxiety? Do I feel bad because I'm being challenged to do something that I've never done before? So this is just a normal reaction to something new that you're just completely confused about. Or do I feel like I'm being diminished? Do I feel like I'm being disrespected? Do I feel like I'm not being heard? The things that can make things feel like they're not working well. And, that being a reason to move on, if that is the direction it's going, that it's extremely important to notice that as soon as possible, so that you don't grind to a halt and then have, looking for a new job when you're completely burnt out and crispy is never fun. And you can use Melissa's technique of checking in every 6 months, which I didn't know she was doing this, and now I'm going to try it out. You can do kind of the organically every week, am I feeling right? But I think that's important, doing the thoughtful work to understand what's important for you, so that before it gets too bad, you have the energy to find the next role that's right for you, is the thing that I think is really important about when the situation is bad. Sometimes those situations being bad can be rectified by a good manager, a good work process within your company. It might be that it's just a project, or it might be that it's a consistent thing. And I think this idea of being this thoughtful and this almost analytical about your career is something that's completely alien to me. My career was literally do excellent work, here's the shiny thing, next shiny thing, next shiny thing. And it's worked out really well. I've had many shiny things that I've worked on and enjoyed. But the times where it hasn't worked well, it has felt like I hit a wall. I hit a wall, I feel my confidence just disappear. I go from thinking I'm amazingly brilliant to why am I even trying? Which is a shocking turn of events when you kind of experience that. And I think almost out of need to not go through that, because I don't deserve that. Understanding that what you need and how you put the framework around it to make sure that you're monitoring that what you need is there, is a way to make sure that you can see what's coming before it gets too bad. So that's the kind of thought that I would just, as an initial thought that I would give about how do you know when to leave when things are not going well, is watching your analysis just slowly kind of take a turn down like this. And okay, I need to start thinking about what's kind of happening and be thoughtful.
Yeah, this is a situation, I don't know if you find that this happens to you, Nida, but one of my warning signals now that I've come to recognize is, excuse me, I'll start blaming myself for things that are going wrong within the team or within my project, and get into this cycle of, and I think that's where I end up with the shattered confidence as well, where I'll think, well, if only I had given that presentation in a different way, or if only the designs had been more robust, or if only this other thing. When I find that I'm doing that a lot on a regular basis, usually there's something systemic going on within the project or the team or the group that needs to be sorted out. And sometimes it's hard to tell whether that's just is this just a blip? Did we hit a rough patch as a team and we need to work through this? Or is this a a pattern that maybe I'm starting to outgrow my role and this is no longer a match, or has my perspective changed and it really is time for me to move on. One thing that I was not good at doing early on, and that I just want to emphasize for people, it is never okay to be disrespected at work. And I think that looking back, there are situations where I would have extracted myself much sooner had I realized that there were microaggressions taking place within the team, and that the culture was not as respectful as it needed to be to have a good dialogue. And when you're in a team that's in that situation and you're unable to resolve it, what's being produced by that team, it's not going to be good. It's when you have an unhealthy culture and your team members are not able to do their best work, and they're not in that emotional place to access their creativity and trust each other, you're rarely going to have great results. And so for me, that has become a non-starter. It's been very important to look at team culture and understand the dynamics of the team that I might be considering working with before I even consider whether the project itself or the work itself would be exciting for me.
You know, it reminds me very much about what you said about, like, if it's a good manager, that like you've moved for like a good manager. It reminds me of that advice, like when you sign up for classes in college, or like just find the professor who's like super passionate about what they're doing, and you'll enjoy the class and you'll learn so much. And I think that very much feels the same way. It's like, you know, team first, you know, and then other things. And I would add something else too, that like, I agree with like Melissa, if you start to blame yourself, or you feel like you can't do something like before you could, that's a sign that you're probably taking on too much without even realizing it. And it's not really about you. It's just about the fit, or someone is you know, treating you badly, or a team's treating you badly. The other kind of angle that I've had is not understanding why things are happening. So I find, you know, in retrospect, like if I'm asking my manager too many times why, kind of like, why do zebras have stripes? You know, kind of response being like, that's just what it is. And that why is important to me. Like, why is this happening? That is a really, really good sign that that's like a company level issue, or like a product area issue, or a team issue, that you just don't fit. So it could be like, you're not, like if you're leading a team, you may not get enough resources to do your work correctly. And if the question, why is this happening, gives you responses that are like difficult to kind of achieve, like this would be different if you were to release this large project, but you can't release this large project because you don't have enough people to do it. Like that kind of like circular kind of thing is another example of like dysfunction within the company, or dysfunction within the area, dysfunction with the team. So, you know, that kind of the constant thing you should probably kind of hearing from us is that know yourself, know what makes it right, and then use that to kind of judge everything that's happening around you, rather than taking in the things that aren't working for you and using that to kind of deny yourself that joy and flow, which is a very hard thing to do, especially if you're very community oriented like I am. The first go-to is like, I'm doing something wrong, which probably not the truth.
Yeah, that is so true. I know I've experienced that as well. So I think what we should do now is jump over to the questions. We've got a few in our Slido, and then if there's time at the end, we'll come back to the general topic of the talk. So I'm going to share my screen, which has the Slido questions on it. So bear with me 1 second. Okay. You should be able to see that in a second. So I'll go with the ones that is most upvoted, and we can see what the answers to this one are. So we'll start with the first one then. What's the best way to stand out? I've been trying everything possible without any success. What's the advice to catch a recruiter's eye? So I guess this is about when you're changing career, or you're changing to a new role.
I can't tell if Melissa you're unmuting or if I'm. You ready to go?
Go for it.
Okay. Just some thoughts that kind of come up. I think this is So there's a couple of ways this happens. One is that when Melissa or I are going to hire someone into our teams, we tell the recruiters what we're looking for, okay? And it could be something like, I'm looking for a visual designer who understands UX, but has like loves motion, right? Or I really want someone who understands how to do systems design, like that kind of thing. And so in that situation, if this doesn't always happen with Google, Google's job descriptions tend to be general, but sometimes if you follow individual people, you get a sense of what they're looking for. But using, like if you see a job description, paying attention to the language they're using is really important. Because what you're trying to basically, the recruiter's like, I want to be successful. And so the way I be successful is helping my client, Melissa and myself, find the people for their team. And usually the job description will give enough information for you to know that. So if you're going to like look at a job description that's about visual design, you should be able to demonstrate visual design, right? You should be able to kind of have that. And what that means is that because it's UX, if possible, even if you're a researcher, having something visual is really important. It's much easier to process than like a text-based resume, as an example. And having be able to have something where like the researcher might literally send us a link and say, here's a portfolio, take a look, what do you think? We don't get that with resumes very often. So I would think about like how you present your work so it's easily consumed and aligned to what the job description wants. I have some other thoughts as well, but Melissa, I want to go ahead and give you some time as well.
I think you covered the majority of it, Nida. I'd say that I just also want to acknowledge that this is a challenging time in general, I think, to be switching careers. So if this is something that you're experiencing right now, this is a topic that frequently comes up in UX coffee hours and one-on-ones. For those who are making a career transition right now, I'm getting a lot of questions around, should I continue grad school instead of looking for a job? Because it seems to be pretty hard to find something. So I think the job market might be a bit unusual right now. So I would encourage you also to not give up hope and be patient. It might take a bit longer than maybe it would have last year. But I would echo what Nida says, that if you are applying for a specific role, making sure that the materials that you're providing are really tailored for that role so that you're not leaving a question in the recruiter's mind about your qualifications. And I know that this can be challenging. I've seen some folks who are thinking about transitioning into UX, and so they're applying for both research and design roles. And my advice in that situation is to make sure that you have a CV or a portfolio or whatever kind of material you're providing that is for that role. If you're applying for a research role, your materials should be about research. If you're applying for a design role, you need to redo your materials with a design lens and submit them that way. But don't try to make something that's middle of the road and very generalized that waters it down, so that next to somebody who has been doing pure design, you're not going to look like as strong of a candidate, even if you have those qualifications. So the design of your design materials is really important.
Yeah, 100%. Like that also, I think, kind of aligns to kind of how you brand yourself. And I don't mean this in a big brand kind of way, but like what you put out there should be something that people like, oh, I get what this person can provide, because we get a lot, that comes in. The other thing that I wanted to add is that there's something that I never did that others have. If you're well suited for this, you might want to consider it. And one of the things is that network really well. Like a lot of my career progression came from my networking from job to job to job, but there's also networking in spaces and like things like this, and like people understand kind of where you are, what you come from. And the other thing is, if you have like a niche or a way that you want to share out what you're doing, that attracts, like those of us who are in these positions, we love finding novel things that are exciting. has a UX engineer done something fascinating that catches our attention, or a user researcher did an analysis that just blew our minds, or a design, even like a design exploration of a movie and how it helps us understand how people think, and we remember those people because it was exciting. And sometimes we'll use them as it would be a great recruiter if you could find someone like this. And that's something else that, again, I've never done that. Probably not, I wish I had, but I never have. It's just not how I am. But if you are that kind of person, that's also another way of kind of creating the space where you're like, this is who I am, world. I know I fit somewhere, right?
Thank you both for that one. I think that what you just said there really relates to the next thought-forward question, which is with the fact that there are so many areas of UX, how would you advise that the people who are new find their place in this field? And are there good tips to help focus in on that particular area?
So for this one, I think there's usually an excitement and almost like a level of stress around getting started in this field, because there are so many different directions that you can take, or so many different skills that you could learn. I often get the question, like, how do I know what I should specialize in? And the answer is, you're not going to know what you're going to specialize in the first couple, or maybe even the first 5 years of your career. So ideally, what you're doing, though, is exploring and figuring out what aspect of the work gives you the most energy and where your strengths are. And you will continue to double down on those things so that you can develop deep expertise. So we talk about the T-shaped model for career development sometimes, where you'll eventually branch out and have competency in a bunch of different areas. And you'll find probably one of those where you just have an incredible amount of excitement and you have an affinity for it, and you will go deep and become a wonderful expert. And when you're starting out, at least for me, I found my experience was that I built out the top shape of my T, and I just kept working on projects as more of a generalist until for me, it was really interaction design, where I ended up going quite deep, even though I started out as a researcher. But none of that experience is wasted. It helps you build up your toolkit, and it also helps you discover that area where you eventually do want to go quite deep. I'm curious whether you have other thoughts about that, Nida.
I think it feels, what I was wanted to emphasize is that it's actually quite normal for us to move within UX roles, to Melissa's point. So you shouldn't feel so much anxiety about picking the right one, because you have the opportunity to try things out generally. We're all so busy that it's delightful when a user researcher is like, I'd like to try my hand at design, or a designer wants to help the user researcher, or we have a designer who is very technical and wants to be UX engineer. These things kind of cross over and happen all the time. And I think that also offers a very unique point of view. So the thing that I've been really intrigued by is UX strategy. And I come to UX strategy from design, 100% design, and even that comic book thing that I talked about at the beginning, that wanting of emotional connection and things like that, very much drive the way I think about strategy. A strategist who comes from user research takes a very different lens to the same problem, and it's fascinating to work together. So it's not as strict as it looks like from the outside. It's actually delightfully messy and soup and stew inside, and you should just pick the thing that you're like, wow, it'd be really fun to do this for the next year, and try it out. And I think the thing that you will find that is most important across all the roles is thoughtfulness and empathy, and having those two things and then building up your skills is a great way to be successful.
Perfect. Yeah, I agree with everything you said there too. Okay, so we have a couple of questions that are kind of the same vote level. And I think one is maybe slightly similar to what we've been talking about, but we can double back to it. So I'll ask the next one, which is, as a woman in tech, Do you have any advice on how to deal with conflict in the workplace? We have so many stereotypes to work against.
Oh, Melissa.
I mean, we're laughing because because we chat about this as well. This is difficult. I have definitely tackled this more deliberately since building a larger team, and I have consciously invested in helping my entire team learn how to have difficult conversations. I wish that I had invested this time much, much earlier in my career. So there are a couple of books that I would recommend. One is called Crucial Conversations. I can't remember the authors right now, I'm sorry. And the other one is called Thanks for the Feedback. Both of them have really valuable strategies for having uncomfortable direct conversations and for accepting feedback that might be well-intentioned but not very well delivered. We think we're kind of lightning rods for this uncomfortable feedback as designers. It's our job to take feedback, and people aren't trained to give feedback, nor are we really trained to have difficult conversations. So I found that having a set of strategies that I can start to practice has been really helpful. Trying to understand my own reactions when I'm in a difficult conversation has been incredibly helpful too. So we all have that natural place that we go to when we feel threatened. In some cases, like for me, excuse me, for me, it tends to be, I go silent. It's very difficult for me to talk. And I get kind of the deer in the headlights situation going on. And it has taken a lot of practice and effort on my part to first just, I have to get in the habit of recognizing when I'm in a situation that's uncomfortable. And then now I'm finally at a point when I can go, okay, I want to react by going silent, and that's not the right thing for me to do in this situation. Instead, I need to do this other thing, and I can change my behavior. I know I'm talking a lot about what we need to do to change, and it hardly feels fair because as women in tech, we do encounter situations that, frankly, we shouldn't be in the situation in the first place. But I also like to think of it, thank you, Lacey. Awesome. I also like to think of it as it's an opportunity for us to model the behavior that we want to see in our teams. And I'd like to think that by us going out into the world and modeling that, we are creating a positive feedback loop that's going to perpetuate in teams where it might not be happening right now.
I do this thing where I get angry and then I hold on to that anger until it becomes like an anger souffle, you know, a whole mini course meal of anger. And I wanted to say that because something that I've had to really do is to let go of that anger, because it was tearing me apart while allowing myself to take, you know, the action I needed. Like many people, I think of the right thing to say like a week later. And it's super frustrating that I'm smart like a week later to figure out what to say something. And it's been, I think the thing that I've kind of come to is that everybody is different in their like personality types and how they engage with this. For me, I need to know that I've got support to take that step that's scary. Okay. So if I have someone who is treating me or my team badly, the options that I think that I have in front of me are very much prioritized by how much harm will come back to me. And understanding the support network I have, like we talked about earlier, like the community that I created around me, who can I trust, who I can't trust, who's got my back, is an important equation to this conversation. Yeah, very much psychological safety. And the thing that I have noticed, and this is especially around racial inequality, racial inequity right now, is that the more space you create in groups for something to be taken seriously, let's say like the gender thing we're talking about right now, the more that things start to change. And I say this, and I'm also going to say it's not your responsibility to change the company. So it's completely okay to be like, peace out, this is not my thing, and go find a place that you feel safer in, that you can like do the work that you want to do. But it's also okay to say like, I think I can make change with this group of people. I'm going to bring this up, and we're going to start talking about how to like the way from the racial inequity side, we have that space in people's brains now. How do we like make it take up more space? Like, what are the things that we do to make sure that this comes up very often? And both those things are okay. And I have found both monitoring my mental health and making sure that I don't get caught up in the whirlwind of like just staying in the anger space, because it only hurts me and doesn't affect anybody else, right? And then also making sure that I've got the support that I need, right? And that if I want to create change in the company I'm in, that I can do it, or I'm going to move on. I think that for me, that's very much top of mind. And every kind of gender-related thing that I run up against has always been, do I have people behind me? And when I've had, it's been much easier to deal with.
Perfect, thank you both. So we've got like 4 minutes left, and I spotted a question that might be quite a nice little tie-off. So I guess for both of you, what is the one thing that you wish you knew when you were a new grad and just started the UX career?
Go ahead.
Go read it.
Okay. That I would have to influence people. And that it wasn't just about doing great work or obvious things that things should happen. That I had to really be very thoughtful. I think Francis Bacon is his name. He has a book on influence. I read that, and I remember reading it, and he did an analysis of like hundreds of people and how they think and how they influence. And then he had a list of all the ways that you can kind of influence. And I realized that I picked the worst one, which was basically like, this is important, we should do it. Which doesn't really work, right? And understanding how other people think that are different than you and knowing how to speak to them is something that has been like the last maybe 5 or 6 years of me kind of like getting it right and practicing it. And it has been such a relief. It's not just the work, it's the people that you're interacting with as well.
That's a really good one. Plus one to that, I would say probably the one that there are a lot that come to mind, but I think the one that broke my heart for a while. Nobody warned me that my design work wasn't going to be good while I was getting started, and that I would have to push through some really not great quality work before it was good. And I've since encountered many designers who end up stuck in this valley where they don't realize that there's a light at the end of the tunnel and that there's goodness up ahead. And it wasn't until I was almost considering giving up on design that somebody finally exposed this wisdom to me. And I was like, oh, I have to keep pushing through this, and I have to keep doing the work, even if it doesn't look as beautiful as I thought it was going to look in my head. And I'm glad I received that advice, because it motivated me to push through that time. So if any of you are going through that, keep at it. It gets better.
Yeah, so much so on that one, yeah.
Well, perfect. Oh, that's a really nice way to round things off. Thank you so much for answering all of these questions and talking about this topic. I know I found it really, really interesting. And thank you to everybody else for joining. We'll put this session up on YouTube soon, and we'll try and respond to any of the other questions that we missed if we can get some time to do that. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Best of luck.
Bye.